The fear isn't in the symbol, it's in what it awakens. Symbols as psychological technology. Long before modern psychology existed as a science, human beings were already studying the mind, not through manuals or diagnoses, but through symbols. In ancient times, symbols were not religious in the modern sense. They were psychological tools. They were used to explain emotions, instincts, inner conflicts, and how consciousness works. The problem began when these tools started to be misunderstood. Egyptians, Greeks, Mesopotamians, and Hindus understood something essential. The human mind operates through images, archetypes, and symbolic patterns. That is why symbols were used to teach emotional balance, impulse control, and self-awareness. There was no separation between spirituality and psychology. Both spoke about the same thing, the psyche. When this knowledge began to generate inner autonomy, it started to disturb established systems. This video is not about belief or faith, it is about historical and psychological facts. We will observe how symbols originally linked to mental health and consciousness were reinterpreted as threats. And we will understand why, when the meaning of a symbol changes, the impact happens inside the human mind. Because symbols do not work outside of us, they work within. Psychology before psychology. Symbols as maps of the psyche. In ancient Egypt, symbols were used as tools to understand the soul. The Ankh, for example, was not a mystical object, but a psychological concept. It represented the continuity of life and the balance between the inner and outer worlds. The circle symbolized eternity. The cross represented material experience. At its core, it was a visual representation of integrated consciousness. The Eye of Horus also had a clear psychological function. It symbolized perception, awareness, and mental restoration. Egyptian texts associated the eye with the ability to see as a whole, similar to what we now call full awareness. That is why it was used as an amulet for mental and emotional protection. Protecting the mind was as important as protecting the body. The feather of Ma'at represented psychological and moral balance. In the weighing of the heart, the symbol did not speak of punishment, but of inner coherence. A heavy heart symbolized inner conflict and imbalance. It was a symbolic way of teaching emotional responsibility. This is psychology, not superstition. Greece, the Pythagoreans, and the symbolic mind. In ancient Greece, symbolic psychology was also central. Pythagoras and his followers used symbols as the language of the soul. The pentagram, for example, represented inner harmony and the 5 principles of existence. It was associated with mental health, proportion, and balance. Nothing about it referred to evil. It referred to psychic order. Plato already taught that the human soul was divided into parts. Reason, emotion, and instinct needed to coexist in balance. Symbols were used to teach this integration. Inner conflict was not seen as a failure, but as a natural condition of the psyche. The role of the symbol was to help the individual understand this conflict. When we look at this closely, one thing becomes clear. The symbol was not moral, it was psychological. It did not say do or do not do. It said observe, understand, integrate, and that alone was revolutionary. Fear is born when interpretation changes. Fear does not originate with the symbol. It appears when the symbol is reinterpreted as a threat. This happens whenever psychological knowledge stops being liberating and starts being seen as dangerous. When symbols related to instinct, desire, and the shadow begin to generate autonomy, the narrative shifts, and symbolic psychology becomes taboo. The pentagram illustrates this clearly. For centuries, it symbolized balance and health. In the 19th century, Eliphas Levi associated its inverted form with evil. The shape remained the same, the meaning was reversed. The human mind responds more to narrative than to form. The same happened with the serpent. For Egyptians and Mesopotamians, it symbolized wisdom and renewal. In medieval Christianity, it came to represent temptation and corruption. The symbol continued to exist, but now it triggered fear. And fear is a powerful psychological tool. Symbolic repression and its effects on the mind. When symbols linked to psychic integration are demonized, the effect is internal. People learn to distrust emotions, instincts, and thoughts. What was once observed becomes repressed, And repression does not eliminate psychic content. It pushes it into the shadow. This is a basic principle of depth psychology. The swastika is an extreme example of historical redefinition. For thousands of years, it symbolized well-being and prosperity in the East. Its appropriation by Nazism completely transformed its meaning in the West. The symbol became an immediate emotional trigger. The mind connects image and emotion without reflection. The same happens with the inverted cross or the horned hand gesture. Originally symbols of humility and protection, they came to be seen as threats. This creates an automatic psychological reaction. It is not the symbol that causes fear. It is the learned association, and associations shape the collective unconscious. Ancestral psychology, the shadow, and integration. Ancestral psychology understood something essential. Everything that is not integrated returns in a distorted form. Repressed instincts return as anxiety. Denied emotions return as emotional outbursts. Rejected symbols return as unnamed fear. What we now call the psychological shadow was already known symbolically, not as evil but as unrecognized parts of the psyche. Symbols were used to bring these parts into awareness. When a symbol is demonized, the integration process is interrupted. An inner conflict becomes constant. That is why certain symbols still cause discomfort today. They activate deep contents the mind has learned to avoid, not because they are dangerous, but because they demand psychological maturity. A symbol does not force, it reveals, and not everyone is ready to see. The symbol was never the problem. When we observe history carefully, one pattern repeats itself. What causes fear today once taught understanding. Symbols were never the problem. The problem has always been what they awaken inside the human mind. Ancestral psychology already knew that consciousness is not born complete. It expands gradually as we learn to look inward. When this inner gaze is blocked, fear replaces understanding, and what could guide begins to frighten. Perhaps this is the most important point of all. This is not about symbols, beliefs, or systems. It is about the relationship each person builds with their own mind. And the more one observes, the more it becomes clear that there is far more than we were taught. If this reflection awakens something in you, do not ignore it. Some ideas are not meant to convince, they are meant to open paths. And here there is still much to be discovered.